The Things We All Carry is a podcast about first responders and their stories surrounding trauma on the job. The intention of this podcast is to raise awareness and share meaningful conversation around a subject often viewed as taboo or simply ignored. Be aware this content may be graphic and it is real. It may not be suitable for children or adults triggered by this subject matter.
Well, welcome to episode 73 of The Things We All Carry. This week, I offer up my conversation with Andy Pantelis. Andy is the District 4 Vice President for the IAFF. For those of you who are non-fire related listeners, the IAFF is the International Association of Firefighters. Andy was elected to his position in 2016, and he represents the local affiliates of Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, and D.C. Andy is also the president of Local 1619, Prince George's County, Maryland, as well as a battalion chief in Prince George's County. He's been with his department since 1997. We spent about an hour and a half one morning speaking via Zoom. The conversation ranges from mental health to retirement to cancer prevention, with a few other topics scattered in there. This kind of conversation is helpful but not exhaustive. We could have spent an episode alone on each topic. Perhaps a deeper dive into a few subjects is warranted in the future. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions or comments concerning this episode or any other. A quick reminder to please help us build a community which not only recognizes but supports each other through the struggles and recovery. Reach out through Instagram at The Things We All Carry or email mystory@thethingsweallcarry.com to offer support and share your story. Please remember to leave a review on iTunes and give a shout out to any first responder you know, love, or care about. Y'all enjoy the show. Joining me today is Andy Pantelis, and you guys better know him as the Vice President of the International. And what I want to do is I'll kind of open it up to him to tell you, where he came from, how he got into what he's doing, and how he got into the role he is today. So we'll go from there and just say good morning. How are you?
Great. Thanks. Good morning, Stack. And thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. You said I am the Vice President of the International Association of Firefighters. We'll talk about some of those things today. I also serve as the president of the Prince George's County Local 1619, Prince George's County, Maryland local, and I'm a battalion chief in Prince George's County Fire Department as well, concurrently.
So where'd you grow up?
So originally, I'm from New York, and I left New York to come to the area, go to the University of Maryland, to go to college. Like most of us from New York and New Jersey, we come down here, move to the region, go to school, and you can never get rid of us. We stay. Sometimes we overstay our welcome, but I've been here now for the last, we'll say, 26 years in Maryland.
So still call yourself a New Yorker?
I do, but I think some of my family and friends from New York would argue against that by this point. And I certainly lost the accent.
Then I guess I need to also ask, is it Mets or Yankees?
So I was a Mets, Jets, Islanders fan growing up.
Okay.
It's a unique trio.
We can possibly still be friends. That works. Anything Yankees, I had to kind of balk at. So
I hear you.
All right. So you get to this position. Why do you want this position? Why do you want to be so involved? Why do you want to be up doing what you're doing?
Well, my current position with the International, it's an elected position, and they are elected every 4 years. And around 2015, the then vice president, my predecessor, had announced that he'd be retiring from his position. And it's something at the IAFF that I looked at, and I looked at the leadership representing the IAFF and representing our members at the time. And I felt that while they were all outstanding labor leaders in their own right and had their own levels of experience, that just about every single one of them on the entire IAFF executive board were retired, were in their 60s, some in their 70s, and that, we didn't really have great representation of the rank and file of the men and women that are doing the job on the street today, of the issues that are most important to us. And so I ran on a platform of bringing that perspective of, a younger guy, a newer generation, and somebody who's still active in their department and in their local union to our internationals, so that they'd have a better idea of what our needs are on the ground, what our members need, what our members deserve.
Are you seeing that kind of change now, though? So you ran on this platform. I'm going to assume that other people have noticed that in the past, and have they thrown their names in the ring? And are you starting to see that kind of more towards boots on the ground, being involved in the level you're at?
Exactly. And in 2016, we probably had the biggest change in leadership on the IAFF executive board. And I think we probably brought down the average age by about 15 years in terms of how old those members are serving. That we saw that in some other districts. And at that time, who is then General Secretary Treasurer Ed Kelly, elected to that role, and now General President Ed Kelly. He's just a few years older than me. He's still active on the job in Boston, riding ladder 17. So we started to see that shift, and it really proved to be very interesting, an interesting time at the IAFF.
So you kind of, I'll use the word revolutionize. I mean, you kind of bring that age down. So it's going to change an outlook on where this union wants to go then.
Absolutely. And in all of our areas, from, the services that we provide to our affiliate leaders, to, to what our members expect, what our members need, what our members think their union should look like and what it should be and how it should serve them. And that crosses all the spectrums, from politics to the resources that we offer, whether it's behavioral health resources, collective bargaining resources, fighting for benefits, and, our lobbying and legislative actions and efforts on Capitol Hill or in our state capitals. There's a different perspective with each new generation in the fire service, and that perspective needs to be represented.
How do you sell the union to young guys coming into the departments who may have no idea what labor does?
That's a good question. I take a little bit of a different approach, because for so many years, you would hear people, kind of pound their fist and say, that you need to belong to the union because, we need strength in numbers. We need to have that solidarity, and, or you're a scab if you're not. And there were so many negative connotations with how people were promoting, our union. Some locals, some jurisdictions did it better than others. But the perspective and approach I always took is that, in addition to all the services that we are expected to provide, our members need to see like a return on investment. Every paycheck, they're paying those dues, or once a month, they're paying those dues at per capita, sending it to their local, sending it to the state, sending it up to the international. And if we're not doing a good job showing what that return on investment is, we're not only failing our organization, but we're failing we're failing our members. So I place a strong emphasis right away in recruit school about what we actually can do for you, where we're going, tangible benefits and tangible products and services that we can provide. And that's not, it's not a one size fits all across our entire international, because we have so many unique departments with so many, differences in the laws that govern how we operate. But, our members need to know, and it's not just sign this form, sign up here, be a good brother or sister or a good firefighter and join the union. It's got to be more than that. And if we don't do that, we are failing. So I've placed a very big emphasis, and our teams have placed a big emphasis on trying to do that with our current and our future members.
It's weird, because just sitting here and hearing you say that, you kind of go through your head. You're like, okay, Virginia is this right to work state. It's kind of right to work light, I guess, now that they've instituted some collective bargaining, and departments are trying to figure out how to do that. Then you have other states that are just full on union states, and then other states that have no collective bargaining. And I can't imagine at the national level how you affect change in all of those states at once.
It's a great challenge. So the region that I represent at the IAFF, I'm the vice president for Virginia, Maryland, West Virginia, Delaware, Washington, D.C., and Pennsylvania. And you hit the nail on the head. The spectrum for what bargaining rights, what labor laws are across those 5 different states in the district vary significantly. You come from a state like Pennsylvania, you go to Pennsylvania, where they have some of the strongest labor laws for firefighters, with guaranteed collective bargaining, guaranteed binding arbitration, making sure that workers have a voice at the table. To, as you mentioned it, Virginia is collective bargaining light. Up until the Dillon Law was repealed a couple of years ago, it was the second most anti-worker, anti-labor state in the nation. So we've been chipping away at that. So there isn't a one size fits all. And that's where some of our divisions, we have such talented staff. We've got a great team at headquarters, both in DC and in Ottawa, that really focus on taking a regional approach or a state approach to the issues that are most important to our members, because there's only so much we could do at the federal level. There's only so much that we could pass through Congress that would really have more than just a paper tiger, really have an impact on all of our members. So that's why that local and statewide approach is so important to us.
How does the union, how do you target politicians? And the reason I ask this, because we all know who's favorable to labor and who's not, but there's so many interests in the fire department or for firefighters in general that it's antithetical to them to say, I want to back a pro-labor candidate when that pro-labor candidate doesn't back what my social issues or my or fiscal issues or whatever it is. So how does the union go about?
That is definitely one of the.
Yeah, how do you go about balancing that?
So it's such a challenge because politics, not only in our union, but just, in society, it's so polarizing. And, in some jurisdictions, it's really easy to make that decision. It's very, very clear who's supporting the firefighters, who's supporting labor. And, each local jurisdiction, each local affiliate of the IAFF has their own local autonomy to make endorsements that best suit their needs and their goals and objectives. But when we're just talking about the IAFF and our international, our national, federal type of endorsements, that's, for incumbents, it's a little easier. We look at voting records. Right. Voting records generally don't lie on our issues. Similar to other labor organizations, you can make a report card of where they are on issues such as collective bargaining or healthcare for retirees, elimination of the windfall elimination protection for Social Security, cancer presumption, PTSD or PTSI support. It's really easy to see that and that record, but new aspiring politicians coming up the pipeline, that's not so easy. So things such as questionnaires and, getting commitments from elected officials or aspiring elected officials to push our legislative initiatives. That's kind of how our process works. But when you talk about the struggle of balancing what our members' other beliefs are, the IAFF, to me in my role may define most of my life because that's what I do. But for our average firefighter, most are thankful to have a union. They believe in their union. They'll help out if they can, but everybody has busy lives. Not everybody has the ability to make that commitment to work on issues that are important to our members. Just, family lives, 2 jobs. We all know overtime, forced holdovers, work schedules, work-life balance is just, there's so much out there. But I deviated a little bit, but back to the how we balance when our members are, disenfranchised with who we support for a particular elected office. I always explain that our union's never going to tell anyone who to vote for. We're never going to try and bully somebody to vote for somebody. I view our role and responsibility as it's our job to educate you on the issues that are important to the IAFF and the union and where that elected official or aspiring elected official stands on those issues. Then it's your job as a union member, as a firefighter, as a citizen to just take that, well, we could call it a report card or recommendation. That's what an endorsement is, a recommendation. And then balance it off of what else is important in your life. You may be, most of our members are card-carrying members of the NRA. That's important to them. 2A rights are important to our membership. So they'll look at the IAFF endorsement. They'll look at the NRA endorsement or other organizations that they may belong to. It could be as simple as, who their church is supporting. And it's our members' responsibility to just look at all those cards and say, this is more important to me, and that's how I'm going to vote. I think it's very important to just make sure that we don't tell anybody who to vote for. Make sure our members know that. It's just really something that, we need to provide an education on fire service issues, and that's it. We don't really delve into the social issues. Sometimes they can cross on a parallel, but typically not.
You mentioned that one of the reasons, well, main reason you kind of ran for this position was to get new blood, younger blood in. What's it like to try and write the course of an organization as large as the national or the international?
So David and Goliath comes to mind sometimes. It definitely takes a culture change, and that culture change starts at that leadership level. And you have to have a group of open-minded, objective elected officers that will evaluate and look at all of those perspectives and be open to change. That's the biggest thing in the fire service, the hardest thing in the fire service, change and affecting change. And that's not just in our fire department organizations or across an entire large or small fire department. That even starts at the top at the IAFF. And we certainly had our challenges with a lot of those changes over, I would say, between 2019 and 2022. We really had a restructuring in leadership, some new elected leadership at the top of the organization, but a tremendous amount of internal changes just in how, we treat our members' per capita money and how that is utilized, what programs they're assigned to, because it's your investment, it's our members' investment. And people who lose sight of that, that's where we start having problems. When you lose sight that our job is to, provide a service or multiple services, provide support, help our members or their families in their utmost time of need, or on just day-to-day things that our members expect from us. When you lose sight of who you're there to serve and represent, that's where we start spiraling. But I think we have our current IAFF executive board and leadership, we have a pretty outstanding team, a pretty diverse team in terms of perspectives and backgrounds, age. We do have a younger representative executive board, and I think we're starting to really do some new great things at the international.
You and I went over a list of questions, or a list of topics we might discuss.
Sure.
And I think the biggest one, and I have to start with the biggest one that this podcast is focused on, is mental health. What does what's the stance, if there's a stance on mental health? And I know that sounds ridiculous, but it hasn't been until the last few years that there's been an actual stance on mental health across the board. So how is it the approach now from the international towards mental health? And, I know that we have the Center of Excellence, and that's union related, but outside of that, what is the approach to mental health?
So I think you really hit it. I would say it was around 2015. The IAFF has a quarterly magazine that goes out to all of our affiliates, and there was a cover feature and a lengthy article about PTSD, PTSI coming out of the shadows. It was a very powerful cover. It was a very powerful article. And when that dropped, the switchboards at the IAFF started lighting up from our members, because it was really the first time that the IAFF, front and center, put a focus on the behavioral health and mental health of our members and the challenges of what our members deal with. It had always been done on the periphery through some course offerings, a couple of seminar topics, but really delving into it and making it on the forefront was that. And when that happened, the IAFF, we realized that, this is a much bigger issue than I think anyone could have anticipated. And when you start looking at some of the universities that we partnered with, and there's studies and surveys, that the percentage of our members that suffer from some form of behavioral illness or co-addiction is staggering. The number of members who have contemplated suicide is staggering, who have what we'll call an escape plan. Those really sounded a lot of alarms, and we knew that we needed to do something more. The Center of Excellence that you mentioned, that's the behavioral health treatment and recovery center that's located in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. There's a second one that's going to be opening on the West Coast this summer in California. That was step number one, to be able to create a safe space for our members, because we were seeing that our members were finally starting to become more comfortable and more at ease talking about their struggles, their challenges, how to cope, coping mechanisms, and what behavioral or mental health disorders they may be suffering from. Changing that stigma that, I kind of came up in the fire service right at the transition where, you know, hazing was kind of going out the door, but, it was suck it up was the mentality. With anything that we saw or any struggle that we encountered, there was a stigma that, may still exist in some places to this day, but I think we're really seeing that those barriers and those walls are being broken down. But that stigma that existed, it was real, and it carried on to the culture in the fire service for many, many years. But those centers were step number one. And then concurrently was changing how we provide, support for our members who are struggling. And for years, we saw either the EAP model, the Employee Assistance Program model, or the CISM model for incidents, the Critical Incident Stress Management model. And those models, while you can pick certain benefits out of each of them, overall, they were failing our members. And a lot of that was due to, when it comes to EAP, distrust, association with management, being concerned or having fear that if the department or your jurisdiction knows that you're suffering from A, B, or C, that somehow that would hurt you in your employment. And then also the stigma still. Do I feel comfortable talking about this at work with my colleagues? So we shifted to a peer support model, firefighters helping firefighters. It's an active listening model in terms of support. It's a model where we are able to provide resources and referrals and recommendations to our members who need them. But the most important part that I mentioned is the listening component. And this, I'd say, equally important is that it's another firefighter. It's, not a clinician, even though we have some phenomenal clinicians that are supporting our peer teams. It's hard enough to get our members to go to a doctor for a checkup, it's to get them to go into an office and lay on a couch for 45 minutes or an hour, and the fear of judgment or pouring out to a stranger that doesn't understand what our members, what we've encountered, what we've seen, it wasn't working. So that peer support model was just key and instrumental for us.
I think the other part about the CISM or the EAP is that it's reactive instead of that proactive approach, where I think peer support can be more of a proactive approach, at least if you're in the station with guys and you're just staying in tune with your guys. That creates all right, I'm going to notice the slight changes before they boil over.
Absolutely. I mean, you give the frog and the boiling water analogy. I think I've heard you mention it in a couple of your episodes.
Yeah.
But that's exactly on point. And we have just to show the success of that program. We just as of our last board meeting, which was the beginning of June, we just hit 10,000 trained peers that are members or voluntarily taking the peer support training program, and that's. It's more than just the 2-day peer support training program. There's a resiliency component. There's financial wellness. There's medical wellness. There's so many different, we'll call them CEUs for all intents and purposes that our members are really, they can't get enough of this training, and they're sopping it up, and they're starting their own peer teams, whether it's local peer teams, state peer teams, or in the district here. We have some fun. We just have some tremendous people doing great work in the district and in the peer support space.
Yeah, I talked to a guy who's one of the main guys with the peer support, Dan Brong from DC, and he had some really good things to say. And I'm happy to hear that they're getting after it there. And I guess he created a civilian position as a mental health coordinator in the city as well, which is I think is a great idea, and I think every department could use that.
We see that popping up in a lot of departments. I know my department has a full-time peer coordinator. We have a clinician. they work hand in hand with EAP, but they are not in the same office, don't report to the same individuals. And it's not the same type of, concern where, well, if I go tell the EAP counselor this, they're going to run to the fire chief and let them know. There's a much greater comfort of confidentiality too. And we've seen it just take off in so many departments. Even that's at the IAFF, we now have 5 full-time positions that are just in the behavioral health peer space. We have a deputy director of behavioral health resources. We have clinicians and the research institutes that we're partnering with, whether it's Johns Hopkins, University of Florida, and others, to study the impact of PTSI in firefighters and the causation and the stressors associated with our job, our line of work. That's what we need to continue to do. We need to invest in that because, I would say next to cancer in the fire service, whether it's suicide or related loss from a behavioral health issue, it's the second biggest issue impacting our members.
Explain what you mean by a related loss.
Not really sure.
So I'm just curious if you mean if that's a way of saying, all right, this is a death that maybe if you look at it from the outside, it can be explained away, but it might actually be a suicide, because I know that these numbers, I don't know it. I have a feeling, I have a very strong feeling, and I think there's some evidence to support it that these suicide numbers are vastly underreported.
Absolutely.
And I can't tell you by how much they're underreported. I can't hand you data that says here it is, but you look at something, and I think I've taken to looking at news reports, and if it says unexpected loss, I kind of read into that might have suicide. I have to think that, and I think that departments are afraid to admit that members are killing themselves because of what it could mean to all right, expected changes. Maybe that there's a monetary component attached to it if it is connected to a service disability because of PTSI or PTSD or whatever it is. And so I just wonder how underreported, and it's not a question you nor I can really answer because it's kind of just a guessing game because of just the way they report statistics.
Yeah, you really hit it there. And some of the research institutes that I was referencing earlier, the partnerships that we've established in their surveys and in their studies, whenever you do research, there are always limitations to research, statistical limitations. And they acknowledge that these numbers are absolutely low and compared to what the true number is. We don't know what that number is, but the underreporting, as you mentioned, it's not only a departmental issue, but it's a family issue. Many families are extremely private, and while some will take a tragedy and embrace it, run with it, and try to affect change and educate people. There's different types of grief, and other people, and other families will keep that close to the chest and not want that information released.
Talk about a stigma. That's a stigma right there. Who wants to say, yeah, my son committed suicide?
And for us in the fire service now and with law enforcement, I don't want to say fortunately because nothing's ever fortunate, but we were successful last August in getting the public safety officer benefit program adjusted and modified that suicide as a result of PTSI is a covered PSOB benefit. We're still working on that for cancer, but to have that loss be covered is it's a tremendous benefit for the families of those that we have lost.
And actually, that's a flip side to those underreported numbers too, because they might be underreporting just because of that. If it's reported as a suicide, they do lose a benefit.
Yes.
So for some reason that hadn't struck me before as a reason for the underreporting. So sometimes a light bulb goes on in this dim brain of mine. Well, related to mental health, there are a few things that we had on the list as well. And I think that everyone wants to know, how do you change a 56-hour work week? Because I think that's a big piece of what we're seeing right now. This allowance of 56 hours to work. it was implemented at a time where departments weren't running EMS calls like we are today. And so there are engines and medic units that are up all night long for 20, they're hitting it 24 hours. And then if you work in my department and in this area, quite often it's a day on, day off, day on, day off, day on situation where you're just exhausted by day 2 or 3. So is there a chance and is there a way of changing that? And how would you do it?
So the way we're working on that now, the 56-hour work week, it's actually not a work schedule issue. It's an overtime threshold issue. So the Fair Labor Standards Act that governs, labor laws, hours of work, compensation. And in the Fair Labor Standards Act, there's a section referred to as Section 7K, which is the work schedule exemption for firefighters and law enforcement. And in the traditional work world, in the 9-to-5 world, with the exception of some exclusions, you are by federal law required to pay time and a half overtime for all hours worked after 40 hours. In the fire service, it's a 56-hour work week or a 112-hour pay period and so on up to a 28-day work cycle. The 56-hour work week most likely derived in the fire service to the maximum amount of hours that we could have an employee work before we needed to pay them overtime at time and a half. So what our goals and objectives are at the IAFF is to change the Fair Labor Standards Act overtime threshold to lower that amount, let's say to 48. Ideally it would be 40 with the rest of the working population, especially as you mentioned it. We're busy departments now. We're up all night. We're all hazards agencies responding to more than just fire alarms, structure fires, and some occasional EMS calls. Our departments and fire-based EMS were the frontline emergency services for about 85% of the country. So if we're able to lower that overtime threshold, there's no guarantee that a jurisdiction will change their work schedule to match. But if we lower that threshold to 48 hours and you're still on that 56-hour work week, that all hours between 48 and 56 are now time and a half overtime. It becomes cost prohibitive for a lot of our jurisdictions and agencies, so that it would be more effective or at least cost neutral to modify that work schedule, put our members on a more healthy work schedule so they had a better work-life balance. We talked about work schedule and sleep and the impact on sleep. Some of those same studies that studied the behavioral health challenges that our members are facing, there is also a sleep study. And I think it's at 37% of firefighters across the U.S. that were surveyed aren't getting enough sleep. I say that's an extremely low number.
Yeah.
But I would double that number. I don't know what that survey pool was, but that's really low. But to be able to change that, it could have a tremendous impact on the quality of life of our members.
And with that, is there an unseen consequence even talking about changing the 56-hour work week or that setup? Because I'm trying to remember what I made mention of this one time and I got jumped on by my local guys, and they were like, "Wait, you don't even know what you're talking about. You start messing with that, then you're going to lose the overtime pay. And then what are you going to tell people when that overtime pay goes away?" So is there an unintended consequence in there? And it's just something we need to work within the framework of the 56, or I don't, is that too cloudy of a question, or is it even a question? It's terrible.
I think I understand where you're going, but if we're able to lower that threshold and make it, a fewer, shorter number of hours that you need to work before you hit that overtime threshold, it'd be really difficult to financially harm somebody, because if they have built-in overtime now based on the 56-hour work schedule, they would certainly have even more at the 48-hour threshold if it were changed. And 48 is just I'm kind of saying that as an arbitrary number, but kind of in unofficial circles, we hear that that's something that could be much more attainable. When you look at the average work schedule across the U.S., it really hits around that 48-hour work week, with the exception of in Nova, you have a lot of 56-hour work week schedules. On the West Coast, you have some unique schedules, particularly with CAL FIRE, and some of the 1 week on, 1 week off. But most of the fire departments are in some sort of 48-hour work threat.
You hit on in that conversation what you just had with sleep, and I don't know what we can do. I don't know if the union can actually affect any kind of change with sleep because I think it relates to the work week, but I also think it kind of relates to the calls that we're running, and how do you change? Can the union play a part in bringing awareness to the community about how do you get that care you need without having to call 911?
Sure, I think all of our jurisdictions, face the challenge of, we'll just call it abuse. It's 911 abuse, EMS abuse, and there's a variety of reasons based on, who, what, where, when, and why. From that standpoint, we usually rely on our local affiliates to provide that messaging. We have an entire communications division at the IAFF, though, with consultants, communications experts, media designers, graphics. We have a production studio. So we can assist with messaging, but usually the local jurisdiction will define the message because, unlike a lot of other unions where it's a top to bottom organization, the IAFF's a bottom to top organization with, every card carrying member having actually through their delegates at a convention, having the most, the strongest voice, the most authority in our union. But unlike the governance structure of some other international unions, our local affiliates have total local autonomy in their jurisdictions, in their departments. Their members at that local level are going to determine what the most important objective is at the time. And our goal and our job is to support that based on the requests that come in through your elected leadership.
Another thing that I'm going to piggyback off of there that you mentioned in there is getting the word out to people and having a committee, that the communications part. How much has that changed now that you have the younger blood in the international office? Because I know that it's still a struggle to get that information out to people. Because I've misspoken before, and I've had my local guys jump on me and go, "Hey, you don't know what you're talking about." It's like, well, then teach me, because and they're like, "Well, this is what we did. This is what we did." But I was like, okay, then why don't we know that that's what you did?
I think overall, globally, we're our own worst enemy in that regard, in terms of not communicating effectively, not just what we are doing, because, we're still in the fire service. It's kind of like, we play that balance and we struggle with that balance of, you don't high five on a fire ground, you do your job. We do it humbly, most of us, or you should. I think a lot of us carry some of those lessons that we learn in the fire service into our union roles. And some things we probably don't do a great job or a good enough job communicating what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what the direct benefit and impact is on you. I think you see that there are some jurisdictions that have phenomenal communications programs that you could emulate. Others that do a great job communicating externally with the public through social media platforms or advertising or other mechanisms. But overall, that's why we do have a pretty strong communications division at the IAFF, a lot of communications training programs too, because we have to do a better job at communicating, not just to our members, but to the communities we represent, to the elected officials and the bean counters that are making the decisions that are impacting the lives of our men and women on the rigs.
That was a little tangent, so I appreciate you answering. I kind of threw that one in on you.
No worries.
You also talked about cancer. And that's a huge topic, and it's even more prevalent today with this advent of the discussion and the discovery of how bad our gear is for us with PFAS. What at your level is the union doing about PFAS?
So this is probably the biggest cultural shift and organizational shift that we've seen at the IAFF on an issue in our history in the last couple of years. Obviously cancer and cancer awareness, cancer education, passing laws to provide better workers' compensation protections and benefits from job-related, occupational-related cancers has been a priority of the IAFF for some time, almost as long as I have been a member. But aside from that, the feel in terms of what we were doing about it we had a t-shirt contest. That was really great in October. I'm saying that a little tongue in cheek,
Right.
but what were we doing to make, generational change in the fire service, proactive change, instead of just fighting for the benefits and protections on the back end for our members who ultimately do contract or succumb to cancer? And that's the biggest philosophical shift at the IAFF that we took. And PFAS, I know you recently had Diane Cotter as a guest on your show, and
quickly becoming one of my favorite people in the world, by the way.
Many of us as well. She is a tremendous champion for the health and safety of firefighters, particularly specifically as it relates to our personal protective equipment, and that it should be free of toxins, and that it needs to be free of toxins, cancer-causing agents that are ultimately being absorbed into our members' skin and ultimately killing them. And Diane, several years ago, and I'm not going to repeat it because you had her as a host and as a guest, and you've already heard her story, but one perspective about Diane was that she was a voice in screaming from the mountaintops about this issue. She had the courage to do it when nobody else did, when nobody was listening. And she never gave up. And she pushed this issue to the IAFF, early on. I know before I was an international officer, I had just heard about it on the periphery, but no one was really listening to her at that time. And I view Diane as such a tremendous champion for what she's done to not only, sound the alarm and bring this issue to light and awareness of it, but that her tenacity, she never gave up. And through her advocacy, through her education, through her partnerships with there's a film that's been released, a documentary film featuring Diane's fight and her husband Paul's story, titled Burned. I highly recommend that if anyone hasn't seen it, that they watch this film, because it's extremely powerful. And that was a long introduction into how it really became an IAFF issue. And when Ed Kelly assumed the role as general president, we sat down. I had the opportunity to chair his transition team, and we made this one of our top issues. And we started looking at the exposures that our members are facing, and that they're wearing it on their backs every single day. And we knew that something needed to be done, and that we were the organization, probably the only organization that could do it, that could, get the ball rolling and affect organizational change, or, cultural change, fire service change. So we looked at the standards of what was allowable in our personal protective equipment, the chemicals that were allowable in our PPE. And our PPE is pumped full of the forever chemicals, PFAS. And for those who aren't familiar, the PFAS is essentially a water repellent. It's utilized in that capacity to repel water and keep our PPE as dry as it relatively can be. We all know it still gets saturated, but to have that in our personal protective equipment, we needed to make a change, and that change really needs to start with the NFPA by changing their standard to not allow for PFAS in personal protective equipment, and to compel the gear manufacturers to make that change, to engage their research arms, their research divisions, and find alternatives that can accomplish the same or similar objectives as what PFAS is doing in our gear, but at a safer rate, at a safer level, with a safer alternative.
And so with that, because now we're getting into occupational cancers, and what is the union doing at the international level about presumption laws?
So presumption laws vary state by state. We have, with the exception of our federal firefighters, we were able to enact various presumption benefits for for our federal firefighters, but the state legislatures at each individual state govern those laws, and they're different. There's a wide array of cancers that are protected in various states in the district and across the IAFF, and then there are a couple of states that have little to no benefit. Fortunately, we see over the last 5 years or so, maybe 10, that is changing, that more states are adopting cancer protections for our firefighters. There's additional research that has occurred over the last decade. The IRC, which, it's the World Health Organization, their committee has identified, about 13 or 14, I don't know the exact number, 13 or 14 various carcinogens that are directly correlated with firefighting and specific cancers. And having that research and having that declaration of, making firefighting and the chemicals that we're exposed to essentially a class 1 top tier carcinogen is really helping, springboard a lot of our state legislatures to take action. It's also helping us at the federal level, where we're introducing to the earlier mentioned public safety officers benefit program to add cancer as a qualified, line of duty death, and that the families of our the survivors, the families of our fallen who do succumb to occupational cancer get the benefits that they are entitled to and deserve. So I think you can never say it's an exciting time when you're talking about something as serious as cancer and how many members, friends that we've lost. But it's exciting of what we see as the potential of what we're able to accomplish. And we know that that's not going to be an overnight change. And we know that's going to be an expensive change. If you were to replace all of the PPE in one rough shot tomorrow, there's a federal study, it'd be about $4.8 billion to do that. I mean, that's the entire fire service across the United States, career and volunteer. But, to make a long-term change that, for the next generation of firefighters, that we can keep them even safer, that's what's exciting of what we see on the horizon.
Hey guys, quick break right here just to check in and thank each of you for listening to the show. Your support has been paramount, and I appreciate all of you. I have one request, though. I need you to share the show with everyone you know. Help me get the word out and spread these stories as far and as wide as we can. While you're at it, please leave a review of the show wherever you happen to listen. Feel free to reach out to me at any time to share your story, to talk, or to pass on suggestions. Let's get on with the rest of the show. And on this topic, I'd be remiss if we didn't at least briefly touch on NFPA. And I know that you kind of got to tread lightly here, but
Sure.
What changes can we make to that organization to make it a benefit to us, not a benefit to the special interest or to the industries?
And that's the greatest challenge, because the structure of the NFPA technical committees, you hit the nail on the head with the word special interest. I mean, it's comprised essentially of all special interests. And one could even argue that the IAFF is one of those special interests, because we have many of our members that have seats at the table on those technical committees. But really, to compel the NFPA to change the standard so that it is not allowable to have toxins in our personal protective equipment, that's what we need to do with the NFPA. That is the end goal of what the IAFF is trying to do with our recent litigation that has been filed against the NFPA.
Yeah. Excuse me. I also talked to Kathy Crosby Bell, Michael Kennedy's mom, and we talked about fire hose as well, and the fact that she had to battle the NFPA on this fire hose, and she still really didn't get. She got kind of an answer that she wanted, but then they rigged it to where it really didn't matter that she got the answer that she wanted. And so it's not just PFAS. Obviously, there's a number of issues they're probably going to fall into that category. And we're kind of at the point where you have to tell departments it's best that you not pay attention to certain standards. And as I understand it, that might be the easiest way to do it. Am I wrong there?
I'm sorry, repeat that.
Well, the standard of saying you have to have this waterproofing in your gear.
hmm
And that's easy for departments to fall back and go, well, the NFPA says we have to have this.
Now I understand. Absolutely. You see, the departments aren't going to be able to make changes because they really don't have an alternative. Right now, there are two gear manufacturers that have just released PFAS-free moisture barriers, and I think those are in the process of being tested to see whether it's wear testing to see, has there been any, loss on other PPE properties that we value, whether it's thermal protection or other hazard protection. So making sure that you have that balance. But you hit it. A department's not only will they not be compelled to make a change, they won't have the ability to make a change unless there is that alternative. And with the NFP, for those who don't want to make that change, especially as costly as it can be, they will fall back on that NFPA standard.
And I know there's a big, I'm not going to push NFPA too far because I know you guys have a lawsuit and I don't want to set you up for failure on it.
Sure.
But it's interesting to see how this approach is now coming to light about people, or I see it on social media and I hear it in passing. Abolish the NFPA, and I'd love to think it's as simple as going, abolish the NFPA, but you can't. I mean, you still need standards,
And that's absolutely not our objective. Our objective is to affect change on this issue and make our firefighters safer. That's the end goal, to be able to affect change in that standard. But the NFPA does have tremendous value in many other areas of the fire service and the standards that we adopt. They are, and when we transition this to a topic such as staffing, they're the gold standard when you look at NFPA 1710 to get 4 people on a fire truck or 5 in some cases in high hazard areas. So abolishing the NFPA is absolutely not the answer. And that's I know that's not the message from the IAFF. That's probably an offshoot or social media campaign that may be going around by some individuals. But it's absolutely to affect the change to make sure that, there's a balance of the interests and that one special interest doesn't control the process or have more influence than the other. And that number one, the health and safety of our members are the priority when these standards are being enacted.
So let's talk marijuana.
Yes.
How about that for lack of a segue, but a segue nonetheless? What is the union's stance on marijuana?
So it's different everywhere. And we talk about local autonomy. So we have a lot of our locals that are doing tremendous work in the marijuana, THC, cannabis space. Pittsburgh firefighters, IAFF Local 1, they were one of the first to actually negotiate into a collective bargaining agreement that medical marijuana was permissible by fire department employees. It was a permitted use. It was, they would not be testing for it. They'd remove it from their higher testing regimen. And that if you had a medical card from a physician in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, that you were allowed to utilize marijuana products. Other jurisdictions, Prince William County, Virginia, FDNY have removed marijuana THC testing from either their annual physical testing, random drug testing, if it does exist, because of various laws that have been enacted, whether it's in the state of Virginia or, in the city of New York, that allow for utilization of not only medical, but recreational marijuana, which also, I'm sitting here in Maryland. Tomorrow's July 1st, a state law changed that recreational marijuana is legal and allowable in Maryland as well. So we are seeing a wave of jurisdictions that are really starting to look at this and, get out of this antiquated mindset of, that marijuana is bad. Particularly, it has tremendous potential and tremendous utilization benefits for our members. And what I like to point to and highlight when we're educating, whether it's a decision maker, an elected official, a fire chief, somebody who sat through too many DARE classes when they were growing up, that they just have this negative stigma associated with marijuana, my response to that is, it correlates back to the sleep conversation. I don't know a firefighter that can sleep before their shift, or at least sleep well. And so what do? They're either taking, 5 melatonins or 2 Advil PMs, and they're waking up in the morning and they're groggy for 3 or 4 hours, rather than alternatives that are available, such as marijuana products to help with sleep. We talk about it in the space of PTSI and PTS, and the properties and the benefits and value that marijuana have for our members that are suffering from PTSI, PTSD. So I think breaking down the stigma is our greatest challenge, but it's our focus, because and I almost failed to mention it, but most importantly, the opioid pandemic, the opioid epidemic, the addictions that are associated with opioid use, and our members that are actually overdosing on opioid products, that are actually dying from overdoses of those products. I know there aren't situations where members are overdosing or are utilizing marijuana or marijuana related products that are causing them harm. So those are the things that we really need to look at and affect that culture change, because it needs to be talked about more. It's a better, safer alternative to what so many of our members are currently doing, for whether it's their physical ailments or the behavioral ailments that they may have.
And I'll dip my toe further into that
Sure.
conversation, and everyone that has ever listened to me or read anything about me knows that I'm a proponent of psychedelics for therapies as well. And I know there's been some movement on things like ketamine, and then if you look at and MAPS, I'm not even going to destroy the name, but the acronym is MAPS, and they're doing a lot of research with LSD mushrooms,
Mhm.
psychedelics for treatment of PTSD and other traumatic. We go with brain injuries because that's what they are. Um, would the international ever get into advocating for something like that for firefighters as well?
I think with the sciences there, we absolutely have to look at that. We have to look at, all the alternatives, because we developed this toolkit and put on a lot of education and investment in opioid addictions and, the opioid crisis that are impacting our members. We need to look at not just one alternative, but multiple alternatives. And you hear probably one of the things that we have to, address and fight the most is, oh, you want your firefighters high at work? That's not what this is about. This is no different than any other medication that's used to treat a condition. My response to a chief that may be concerned, how do we test for this? You don't. You don't test for opioids now if you have a prescription. If our member blows out their back and they get a prescription from their doctor for way too many opioids, and if you take it, I don't know many, if anyone's taking it while at work, because it will impair you. But on their off days or their nights before their shift, they absolutely are, because it's a prescribed medication that they're utilizing for treatment. And my response to a chief or an elected official would be that if a member who is on duty, who is legally prescribed opioid, takes a test, whether it's a random drug test or a post-accident test or a physical test on their work shift, they are going to test positive for opioids. It will be in their system. It doesn't mean that they're under the influence of it at that time. And they need to take that same mentality and thought process for marijuana, THC, cannabis use. Uh, it's just going to be that light bulb needs to go off, and that culture shift at the management level. But I think, in many of our jurisdictions, you're doing great things in this space. I know, some of your colleagues, not only our locals that I mentioned, but some of your colleagues in the streaming world, like 5 After Midnight and a couple of other podcasts are really highlighting this issue and doing great work in this space. And the more that this conversation is had, I think the faster we're going to see that cultural shift.
Can the international get involved at lobbying in the federal level?
So I think what our discussion and our focus is geared towards is reducing it from a Schedule 1 narcotic. If you reduce it way down onto the spectrum, if it's still going to have some sort of narcotic classification, the Schedule 1 issue is really what is a hindrance, and jurisdictions are concerned about grant funding and having what type of tolerance policies they need to have. That is where our focus really is going to lie, if we can get that reduction in the schedule of narcotics. And that's something that our government team, our lobbying team is absolutely looking at.
Yeah, that Schedule 1 is such a killer. It just automatically makes it enemy number one, or public enemy
Yeah.
number one in people's eyes. And and it goes back to what you said. It's antiquated. It is just it's a view that doesn't need to be had anymore. And I think it's so much more about education than anything.
And we absolutely agree. We're actually, looking at it. It's a little more difficult to partner right now with the legal prohibitions with organizations for our active members that are on the job, because there's so many different states and jurisdictions that have, a variety of policies. But we're looking at really trying to provide some support for our retirees in this realm, because they don't have those same stipulations or prohibitions, because they're no longer on the job in a public safety capacity. That, at a minimum, if we could start with our retirees, who I arguably would benefit from it as much, if not more, than our active members. That's really something that we could use to springboard how we move forward.
Speaking of retirees, let's get on a different topic again. Health insurance for retirees. How do we fix that?
So lowering the Medicare age down from at 55 or below, that's something that legislatively we look at, but there's no one size fits all for healthcare. I know, my jurisdiction and your jurisdiction, we have two different healthcare programs in retirement. And there's really not a one size fits all. So that's the greatest challenge. So one thing that we have done at the IAFF, we have a subsidiary that we call the IAFF Financial Corporation.
Mm-hmm.
It is a separate corporation. It is not run by members' dues, but they also run our IAFF Foundation. And what the IAFF Financial Corporation, their primary focus has been, how do we have greater access to not only just general healthcare, but better healthcare for our retired members? And what you're starting to see pop up at the international level from medical trusts and healthcare trusts that locals or jurisdictions can adopt to provide healthcare for retirees, to, unique customized programs by some of the larger health insurance providers for our retirees to, bring the cost down of healthcare. Because if you have to just, without any help, any benefit, go out on the open market as a retiree and get healthcare, it's crippling in some ways. It's not affordable. It's not sustainable. So from our retiree space, that is absolutely the number one issue for the IAFF, lowering the eligibility for, Medicare, Medicaid, and absolutely finding cheaper, better healthcare alternatives for our members in retirement. Some of that can be done at the local level, but we realize that it's such a great challenge that we need to be able to provide something like a one-stop, one-size-fits-all benefit for our members that don't have access to healthcare in retirement.
Yeah, and then I guess the question becomes, how big of an apparatus does that need to be? Because that's a massive undertaking to think of it that way.
It is, and that's why we actually have to wind up partnering with national or international healthcare provider firms, insurance firms, because we can't do it on our own. Even like a medical trust, you need a third party administrator, just because it's such a monster, such a behemoth. We just wouldn't have the resources or the personnel to be able to administer something like that.
No, it just seems so. It's a daunting issue. A number of these things are just daunting issues that you just have to kind of pick apart, I suppose.
Absolutely.
Let's see. I'm trying to think of the question that I said to you that I wanted to talk about, and a coworker of mine gave me, and you kind of made you start to think right away, was this gold standard, this idea of a gold standard for fire departments. Do you see something out there that you can look at a department and go, that's what we all need to emulate? How do we get there?
I would say no, globally, like for an organization as a whole. I can't think of a gold standard department that they just get everything or most things right. Um, they all have their nuances. They're all very unique. But what I can say is that there are certain things that departments are the gold standard, whether it's a behavioral health program taking care of their members, whether it's safe staffing, whether it's a healthier work schedule, and or what their leadership looks like. Because you could have something that one may consider a gold standard for a department, and they could have a change in leadership, and that could end overnight. Because the leadership at the top really drives that train and defines the direction of that department and how it's going to operate. And it's amazing how a wonderful fire or EMS department can essentially be ruined by a bad fire chief, bad administrator, bad manager. But in the region, if you want to look at who are doing great things, I mentioned the behavioral health space. I think the gold standards in behavioral health are still FDNY with the FDNY counseling unit and the Phoenix, Arizona Fire Department and their behavioral health programs. They are tremendous. In 2016, when I served as the local president in my home local, Prince George's County, we had a very tragic line of duty death when we lost John Olmschneider, who we affectionately referred to as Skillet. He was shot and killed while responding to a medical emergency in the south part of our county. And in the aftermath of that, in addition to supporting Skillet's family and the members who were on that incident, that's when it really came to light in our department that we really didn't have any effective support resources for our members who were in crisis. We had EAP, and that was it. We didn't even have an effective SISM model to help respond to that incident. And that's when we looked at the peer support model in Prince George's County, Maryland. And we have a phenomenal group of individuals that are passionate about taking care of the behavioral health of our members. Our team is outstanding. I'm extremely proud of them. There are over 70 of them that are actively engaged in providing peer support to our members. But who we looked at to build up that team was the FDNY counseling unit in Phoenix. And all programs will change over time, but I would say that those two departments are the gold standard when it comes to behavioral health. When it comes to staffing, and I refer to apparatus staffing more, you look towards more of more of our municipal departments or our larger jurisdictions that actually have the ability to put 4 firefighters on a rig. And I could speak from when I started in my jurisdiction that I was assigned to a firehouse as a single career firefighter with an engine, a ladder truck, and an ambulance. My job was to get whatever out the door, and that was not in the distant past. So to transform from essentially a driver only type of model, which I see you nodding. I'm sure you've seen it in your jurisdiction as well over the years, and your jurisdiction has changed and grown to a fully staffed 4-person on a rig fire department is a tremendous feat that we're seeing in many of our jurisdictions. But that staffing increase comes at a cost.
Yes.
And our jurisdictions aren't keeping up with the hiring for that demand for service, whether it's increasing staffing, whether it's growth, whether it's the decline of the volunteer fire service, and they're not able to provide the fire protection that they used to be able to provide. But without adequate hiring and the need for additional staffing, our existing members are forced to carry the burden of that entire workload, which translates into mandatory overtime, forced overtime, holdovers. And in just the region alone, my department included, that is the number one issue that's affecting the quality of life of our members. When we talk about our members going home at the end of their tour. We talked about that, from a health and safety and physically actually going home and not getting injured or killed. Now we're also talking about that in the space of we legitimately don't know if our members will be able to get off work at the end of their tour. And the impact that that's having not only on their physical health and mental health, but their family lives, their relationships. Divorce rates are higher, financial issues. I would say it is the issue of the day. And that's issue of the day is an understatement. It's not a powerful enough statement for how big of a problem this is for our members.
And I think that we find ourselves in a catch-22 because then we're rushing to hire, and we're I don't maybe not lowering the standards, but I think in some cases we're turning a blind eye to a couple of things,
Mhm.
and we're accepting some things that we wouldn't have accepted in the past. I can speak from own experience of watching people come in late for a CPAT or not show up for a CPAT, but being given a time slot later in the week to go ahead and come in and do it again, or give another shot to come in on time, or excusing that they're 30 minutes late and letting them test anyway. That's stuff we would not have seen in the past.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's that balance and that struggle, because when you're on your 48th hour at work or 24 hours of a forced overtime hold, by that 47th or 48th hour, you really don't care who's coming in to relieve you and what skill set they have and what competency level they have, just that there is a body there to replace you so you can go home. And I understand that mentality, but it's a dangerous one for us to have.
So as we get to the end of this and we're kind of wrapping up a little bit, what are I'd say, let's go with the top 3 goals, maybe that you have personally for the organization or that the organization has identified in the next few years.
I think that we absolutely we talked about it earlier. We need to do a better job communicating with our members. And that's just not communicating out to our members. That's not just telling you what we're doing or what you know we think you want us to be doing on your behalf. It needs to be that two-way feedback. We need to listen to our members. We need to, you know, survey our members. And I don't want to say it in, kind of a cheesy, just catch-all term when I say survey, but really get meaningful feedback from our members about, what's important to them and what are their expectations of us. So I think that transcends across all of our issues at the international, that we need to do a better job communicating out and in with our membership, so we know the direction to go in the future. So, it's not just 18 of us sitting around a table making the decisions on your behalf. We need to make those decisions in an informed manner. So communications would definitely be one of it. Um, the other thing is that we've seen regionally and that we're expanding. We need to continue to be more proactive rather than reactive in the medical conditions that are facing our members and how we detect that and how we support that. We've recently, over the last couple of years, partnered with several organizations, one in particular, UDS, United Diagnostic Services, who provides medical and cancer screening for our members. And the number of cancers or other medical conditions that are being caught early that never would have been caught is staggering. It's something that we need to push out and change when we talk about changing standards. That the medical physical standard for our members that are outlined in NFPA 1582, we need to change that standard to include ultrasound, blood work, diagnostic, preventative, proactive cancer and medical screening. We need to catch it early rather than spending more of our time and energy focusing on what we can do for the members or their families after they contract or they succumb to an occupational cancer or other illness. So that would be two. And then for me personally, I think that we touched on it a little bit, but we need to redefine our political program, our political brand, because, everything happens at the political level. Nobody likes it. Everybody hates politics. It feels dirty. It is dirty sometimes, but it's really the nature of the beast. It's the hand we've been dealt, and the people that are making the decisions. We need to make sure that they're informed, and we get as many of them on our side. And the way we do that is through endorsements and other support. But it's very hard to do that when you don't really have our membership on board in the same direction. Many of our members say or think that their dues money are used for political purposes. They aren't. We have a separate arm. It's our fire pack, which are voluntary contributions. It's actually illegal by the federal government to utilize members' dues money for political contribution to candidates. So that all comes from fire pack, which is that separate branch. But letting our members know that, and at least soliciting more feedback in those political endorsement process, that I think that's key. We need to change that process and that brand almost, because so many of our members do identify the IAFF as their identity. And when we would make an endorsement that's contrary to the other personal beliefs of a member, to say, who are you to do that, to take my identity away? That's my brand too. That's my IAFF too. And I ride around with the IAFF truck sticker on the back of my truck, and people are going to see that, and they see who we endorse, and that doesn't associate all the time with their other values. So giving our members more of a voice in that process, but also educating members more about why we make the endorsements that we do.
Yeah, that education piece is so huge, because that's exactly it. I'll admit to right now that I didn't realize that there's a fire pack. And you do hear it. You sit around the station, and the international endorses a candidate, or even the local endorses a candidate that doesn't align with everybody's thoughts and values when it comes to, say, 2A or whatever it is. And
Sure.
and I'm an outlier in my firehouse. I have different beliefs than many of the other people in my firehouse, and I still don't always agree with the choices. But I never realized where I was getting to is that you do hear them go, I'm not paying for those people to endorse them. But now you kind of get that word out. That goes back to that communication part, because I had no idea that there was a fire pack. And so that's interesting to hear. That's actually good to hear, because there's a difference there.
Another education piece about the politics, and I know this wasn't a conversation around our politics, but that's a good highlight, is we are the most bipartisan fire pack of any other labor organization. We contribute to the most Republican candidates. It's about 37%. It teeters based on the year, but that's about the benchmark, because there's always this stigma that we have unions always and only support Democrats.
Right.
And that is, that's not the case. I could point to an example that, recently retired through term limits, Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, a Republican governor, probably one of the greatest champions that we've had in the fire service for firefighters in decades. The work that he did in terms of not only support for our programs, but for cancer presumption and expanding that, and even supporting collective bargaining. It's very rare you hear of a Republican governor supporting collective bargaining, but they are out there. And those are the ones that we form relationships, because at the end of the day, we're just going to look for who's going to support firefighters. So that's an important education piece as well.
I'm going to hit you with a different question that we didn't cover.
Sure.
And it goes back to the reason why you ran for office. You said you ran for office because you wanted new blood. You recognize that the people at that level were becoming, for lack of a better word, maybe staid and old. How will you be able to recognize, or will you be able to recognize, when it's your turn to step aside?
So that's really interesting, because I'm dealing with that now in my local jurisdiction. I have been the president of Prince George's County's local union for almost 15 years. And when I first was elected to local president, I was our rank of technician, which is an engineer apparatus operator. And I'm now a battalion chief. I promoted through the ranks while I concurrently held the union role. But our union position, we are very rarely in the field on a rig. We're assigned to work in our capacity as union leaders. We We'll occasionally pick up some overtime or details, but our role is, we're in an office where we're kind of riding a desk to an extent. Recognizing that when the time to step down is so important for any leader, whether it's a union officer at a local level, international level, even a fire chief, in any organization. And so many people fail to do that. I knew, at my last term, I'm in my last term of office, but right before my last term, I was not going to run for my position again because I knew that I'm so many years out of the field. And as much as I try, and as much as I surround myself with great people and great teams that will try and help keep me grounded and keep me in touch with what's going on, there's nobody better that knows what's going on than, the people that are still riding the rigs and the challenges that are being faced. And the further you get away from that, it's just natural. You're going to lose touch. We have many leaders that do a great job of finding ways to stay in touch, but it's important to know when the time is right to step down. And that's, I realize that at my local level. We have a great team. I have, great members in our organization that will be able to step up and will be able to pass the torch. We've really focused on succession planning, but, organizations that don't focus on succession planning or leaders that, can't get out of the way of their own egos, that's a detriment for all of us. So knowing when to step down and step aside is important. I've recognized that at the local level, and I'm sure when the time comes at the international level, I'll do the same.
It's interesting because the difference between your state, Maryland, and my state, Virginia, is that you get to focus on that job as a union leader, where my guy, Mitch Nason, who is just busting his ass for Prince William County and for our local, he has to ride a rig every other day on a tour and do this job. And I give a shout out because he's one of those guys who actually, you talk about cancer detection. He's one of that fought for screenings here for us, and he's still trying to fight for that. But to imagine that workload while trying to do that and the union side of it is it's kind of crazy to me.
It's staggering, and you hit it. Mitch is a rock star, and what he's done not only in Prince William but in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Mitch has a great team. You've got a great executive board. Paul Hebert before Mitch as well. These guys have done tremendous work, but they've been doing it while on the rig, while getting mandatoried, while trying to have a family as well.
Right.
I know many of us on this side of the river are more fortunate that we have that ability to work in that capacity full time, but that is the exception and not the rule. Most of our leaders across the country are doing it day in and day out without having that benefit.
All right, I'm going to hit you with the last couple of questions I hit everybody with,
Sure.
if you're willing to answer them. I'm going to throw kind of a curveball at you. I want to know what the last song is you heard.
The last song that I heard, and I actually have it, just so I don't get it wrong, I heard it on the way into the office this morning. It was, it's actually pretty fitting. It was a cover by Chris Cornell.
Okay.
And that Chris Cornell was lost to suicide in 2017, and he did a Prince cover on.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Nothing Compares to You.
Yeah.
And it is a powerful, phenomenal version of the song, and that is the last song that I heard on the way into work this morning.
That I like that choice. I like that one. That's perfect. All right, so what's an everyday carry for you? What's something you carry that you walk around with, or if you walk around without, you feel naked?
Well, unfortunately, it's my phone, because in this day and age, the phone is the office. I don't really have anything else that I carry from day to day. It's hard to get into a routine as well. I try to, like everybody else, a wellness routine, try and take care of myself. Easier said than done. Unfortunately, what I carry every day is that phone, though. It's kind of hard to get away from that.
What about a book? You have a book suggestion you can offer the audience? Something that, I don't know, it can just be entertainment, or it can be something that brings more value, more educational value.
I'd actually say it has nothing to do with the fire service, and it is a Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway.
Okay.
It is. I'm looking at it right now. It's sitting on my shelf. I think it's a literary masterpiece. I think everyone should read it. And even though it is, it's not related to the fire service. It's related to, has some military background, World War I background, and just, I think it's a masterful piece.
Any parting words you want to offer up?
Well, my parting words are really to you and to thank you for what you're doing. I've listened to many of your episodes, and the issues that you're tackling, without your voice, and other voices in your space that are doing this work, so many of these issues wouldn't be talked about, and they wouldn't be out there. And because of your efforts and your advocacy, it's not just people like us that are watching. There are fire chiefs that are watching. There are managers that are watching, elected officials that are seeing this. And, if you could just change one mind on one of these important issues, on the wide array of tremendous issues you bring to light, you're doing tremendous things for us. So it's just an honor to be here with you and to be on your show. And I just thank you for the work you're doing.
Well, I appreciate it. I don't know if it's deserved of those words, but I do appreciate the words. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, bro.
Well, I appreciate the time. I know it was a long time coming. We danced around the date for a while there, and luckily we got it scheduled. So I appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you very much, Stack.
Go enjoy the rest of your day, sir.
You too. You be safe, bro.
All right, take care. We're out.
Thanks for listening to another episode of The Things We All Carry. Head over to the website, thethingsweallcarry.com, for show notes, resources, and to sign up for the newsletter. Until next week, take care of yourselves and remember to check in on each other.